Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you find your unique teaching style. My goal with this podcast is to share helpful tips, strategies, and to give you the motivation you need to gain momentum in your teaching so you can continue being the music teacher rock star you already are. Welcome back to the podcast. You are listening to episode 74. Today's podcast is with Bryson Tarbet, who is speaking about something that is so near and dear to my heart. I am an autism mom, and so I love talking about special learners in the music room. And he has so much experience with working with kids on the autism spectrum and helping them thrive in the music classroom because I fully believe, and so does Bryson, as you are going to hear, that all kids, regardless of their diagnosis or what they're identified as, can learn in the music classroom fully and be engaged in there and have an amazing time learning music. So a little bit about Bryson. He's an elementary music educator just outside of Columbus, Ohio. He teaches between two buildings, wow, and serves nearly 700 students, kindergarten through sixth grade. He received his Bachelor of Music in Music Education from Ohio Wesleyan University and is currently pursuing a Master's in Music with Kodály Emphasis. And he also completed Kodály Level 1. So in addition to his traditional music education responsibilities, he also serves students with exceptional needs in self-contained music classes, which I think is amazing. And you guys are going to love hearing about this from him. But he also says, regardless of the situation, he strives to create successful music making experiences for all of his students, which I love. He's a proud cat dad and he loves to wear silly socks, which of course, don't we all? I'm sitting here in my fuzzy socks actually right now as I record this introduction. And so I cannot wait to just dive right into this episode because this conversation, you guys, was just so very good. And I just can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with today's episode about working with special learners in the music classroom with Bryson Tarbet. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to have Bryson on. This is way long overdue. We have had this interview scheduled for forever, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart. As a mom of an autistic child, I am so excited to talk about special needs learners in the music room, and he is just so knowledgeable about this and has so much wisdom to share that I cannot wait to pick his brain about it. Before we do that, Bryson, just go ahead and share a little bit about who you are and tell everybody who's listening where you teach and all those good things.
First, thank you for having me on your podcast. Again, I've been looking forward to this forever. So again, my name is Bryson Tarbet. I teach kindergarten through sixth grade general music at two different schools outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have two different buildings, around 700 students, and it's amazing. And I love it. We'll talk a little bit more about why I love my schedule and why this topic means so important. But so I got my undergraduate Bachelor's in Music Education from Ohio Wesleyan University. And I'm actually in the middle of working on my Master's of Music with a Kodály Emphasis from Capital University. So I did one of the summers, plus my Kodály Level 1 this past summer. So that was definitely something special. But again, one thing that really makes me whole as a music educator is being able to make sure that all of my students' needs are met, especially those students that sometimes I think can easily get forgotten.
Yes, it's so easy, I think. Well, first of all, I'm just going to go here with this conversation already. I think I saw this on your Instagram stories once. Maybe it was someone you were answering or either you posted it, but I feel like as music teachers, first of all, I think a lot of music teachers maybe don't know that they are legally allowed to see students' IEPs. And I think sometimes it's hard, not because maybe they do know, but it's hard because you have so many students. So you're like, how am I supposed to go through that many IEPs, or how am I supposed to get to know these kids? So a lot of times you get these kids in your room and maybe you're not aware that they have special needs, but you can kind of tell a little bit something's going on if you don't know what it is. But do you have any pointers around that, first of all, just how they can get to know their students? Do they ask the teachers, or what advice do you have around that?
Well, first, it's definitely an issue because again, we have so many students, and it's
Yes.
hard to. I mean, knowing that kind of information it's kind of deep information. To know that for
Mm-hmm.
so many kids is really tricky. Um, but again, that's something we're not only required or able to see, but it's something we're required to have. And
Mm-hmm.
again, most of the information that's going to be on something like an IEP, adequate plans or something, or accommodations, a lot of it will not apply to us, and that's just the reality of it. But a lot of it can, and a
Yeah.
lot of it, small testing, preferential seating, things like that, that we should have that information so they're able to follow those. Not only because it's our job and it's something we're required to do, but it's in the best interest of the student. The first thing is I think we have to be advocates to our students, and I think a part of the problem also goes on to the music ed, the reality of getting your undergraduate music ed, which is like, hey, let's take all this stuff, put it into one here, and like hope see what sticks. Is when you're when you're putting so much all together, you're going to miss some things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think oftentimes it can be that working with special education students and working with special learners, that component can get often missed. So my first tip for you is reach out to your intervention specialist, reach out to your homeroom teachers, um, see what students are, have accommodations, have IEPs, have 504 plans, and see if you can get access to those. If you don't, you're going to have argue a little bit because that's something you need to have. And it's
Yeah.
something that it can really drive your instruction and make things work better for not only for you, but for your students, which is, at the end of the day, which is why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And sometimes the special ed teachers are good about um, approaching you and saying, hey, here's how you can accommodate, but you don't always have that case. It
Yeah.
just kind of depends on where you're working. And so, yeah, but you be proactive and don't be afraid to speak up. I know sometimes as music teachers, it feels like, well, can I say that? Am I allowed to ask this question? Yes, you are. So don't be afraid to just go in there and ask. So, Bryson, I want to ask you, how did you start working with students of special needs? I would love to hear your story around that.
Oh, it's a wonderful story, and I'm so glad that it happened the way it did. So I actually did my student teaching in a weird way. So I did my student teaching the third quarter of the year, so January, and then I actually had some health concerns, so I took the rest of the semester off, and I ended up finishing my student teaching from August to October. So then when October came around, I didn't have a job and I was done with
Mm-hmm.
school. And, as the reality of it, not a lot of positions open up in the middle of the year, especially since I was tied down with an apartment and things like that. So I ended up taking substitute positions. And while I was waiting for the state of Ohio to process my license, because that can take quite a while, I was
Yes.
actually working off of a paraprofessional license. So a lot of my first jobs after actually graduating were in special education classrooms on different levels. A couple of long-term positions. One of my favorite ones was in a as a one-on-one aide with some students for an entire quarter. I got to work with them where I student taught, which is really cool. So I got
That's
to have that
awesome.
relation. And then what really kind of made me realize this is something that I loved and enjoyed was when I got a long-term position in an autism unit,
Mm.
which it was something that when I took the position, I was terrified. I had no idea what that meant. I'd never worked with students with autism, but the moment I stepped in that classroom, I realized that it was amazing. It was something new every day. Sometimes that was rough, but I really truly loved working with that and those kind of students in that population. And that's really what kind of tugs at my heartstrings to make sure that those kind of students have a place in my music room as well.
I love that so much. Oh my goodness. So like I said, yes, my son has autism, and so this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And he loves music, and I just have seen him thrive. Like he is one of those kids that just can hear a song on the radio and just kind of starts picking up the melody and just singing it by rote. It's amazing to me that I'm like, what the heck? Like, kids just don't do that. I mean, some kids do, but so he is in a self-contained classroom this year, which is his classroom is third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so I know you see classes like this in the music room. And so I would love to ask you, when you're seeing a class like an autism class or contained class or whatever they might call it, academically linked, when you see a class come to you that has a mixture of ages or grade levels, do you have suggestions on how to teach music when it's a group full of different ages of kids and special learners for that matter too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, first thing, what's nice about not only the state standards of Ohio, but the national core standards is they give us a little bit of they're a little vague in a good way, because it kind of allows us to work from these different curriculum and these different standards with any students, even regardless of the age, or mixed age.
Mhm.
Once again, working with students with special needs, I think the big thing is meet the students where they are. Never try to push your curriculum or what you think they should be able to do on them, because that's not going to be fun for anyone involved. It's
Mm.
just going to stress you out. It's going to cause undue stress on the students, and they're not going to have those successful musical experiences, which, at least in my opinion, is the goal of music classes.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it's make music every day. Every day, from the very first thing you do, make music. The very last thing you should do is make music. And just, I think for me at least, and with for my specific students I had to kind of slow down, whether it means taking a little bit more time here, realizing that, in my case, I only have like 5 or 6 students at a time, so that, allows me the time to be able to slow down and kind of work a little bit more with each student rather than having 25 students running around. But my big thing is try to see what interests them, as class, as individuals. What are their likes and their dislikes? Because there are ways that you can draw them in, and there are ways that you can draw them in a way that allows them to create these successful musical opportunities, that will keep them wanting to come back.
Hmm. One of the biggest misconceptions I can say as a music teacher that I had about autistic kids is you hear about the most severe cases. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I did have a student like that who came in who just covered his ears. He could not handle the noise. And it just took like, I was intimidated at first, but I think it just takes, like you said, learning their learning styles.
yeah,
And okay, this is really loud for him. What can I do? And so it's just a matter of figuring out how they learn, how you can adapt modifications that can be made. And so let's say you are a teacher listening to this, or you have experienced an autistic child that is one of those cases I just described. What are suggestions you have for the music room when it is just so loud for them that they just feel like, you're just intimidated by teaching
yeah.
them, I guess is what I'm asking.
I mean, first, those sensory things are real, and they like it's. I don't know if you've ever done this, but our district at my um, onboarding training, they had a virtual reality simulator of what one individual with autism might feel like, and it was really interesting to see, because the sounds and the way the sounds, it was very overwhelming, and I think that's a lot of the times the behavior that teachers can worry about often comes from overstimulation
Mm.
and just being overwhelmed. So my big thing is, first, you can get headphones super cheap. My favorite, like the over-the-ear headphones that I like, you can get them at a dollar store. They're not the great, ones that you can get in like a PE or like an OT catalog or something,
Yeah.
but they do enough, and also they kind of like squeeze your head a little bit, which for some
Mm.
students can help them as well. But another thing is just realize what kind of are the triggers for some of your students. For instance, I have one student that cannot do egg shakers.
Mm.
It's too, for some reason, that specific sound is too much for him, and it will set him off completely.
Interesting.
Yeah, so oddly enough, anytime that I would normally use an egg shaker, I use maracas, and maracas are fine. But yeah,
Wow.
and it's very
Okay.
interesting. But egg shakers, for some reason, that specific timbre and speed and
Huh.
things is like a trigger for that student. So I
Wow.
just should try different things and see what works and what doesn't, and kind of work from there. Um, but again, the headphones are really good options, um,
Yeah.
for students.
Yeah. I love that because you would have never figured that out about that child. It's just kind of like process of elimination.
Exactly.
And I mean, he didn't just walk in and say, "Hey, I can't hold the egg shaker. I just can't handle it." You had to figure it out like
Yeah.
by, trial and error. So I feel like sometimes teachers fail to realize how much students with special needs are capable of. And so I just feel like they're like, oh, well, I have to accommodate or modify. So they are just not going to be able to do this activity. And maybe they won't be able to do it like the other students can, per se, but they are capable of learning music. So I would love to dive into this a little bit and have you just talk about what special needs learners are capable of in the music room. Any suggestions you have around that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I believe that assumption that students are not able to meet this goal comes from us wanting to make sure that students are always successful. And I think that does come from a place of good, but I think we also tend to err on the side of simple, with just so that we're able to say that these students were successful. But I think if we're always dumbing it down and simplifying it, we're not necessarily pushing our students to try something new. We're not pushing them to kind of to work through from where they are to where they're going. The power of yet things. And again, I think this works with all students, but especially students with exceptional needs. I think it can be very easy to not want to do something wrong, so we do something very simple, or we don't do as much, just because we don't want them to fail. And I think it's okay that failure is fine as long as it's structured right, and as long as you still have those moments for success.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I feel like music teachers too, like you've already touched on, the music teaching standards are so vague. And so it's kind of open to interpretation anyways, but I feel like whenever they are teaching the standards, they're so focused sometimes, which I completely understand, but on I have to get through every standard and every objective. And so they try to just, like you said, rush through things. And with the special needs learners, you can still get through the objectives. Yes, but you can modify for them, but they will rise up and meet you.
Yes.
It's just about, like you said, meeting them where they're at, figuring out their learning style, and then accommodating, if like the egg shaker example.
Yeah.
And I know it's so hard. You have, let's say, 25 students, and then 3 in that class have special needs, and they're all different special needs, and you only see them for 45 minutes. And so you're just sitting there like, well, how am I supposed to accommodate for these kids when I have all this other stuff going on? Do you have suggestions around that when you have a classroom full of kids coming in like that?
Yeah, my biggest interaction with students that have been mainstreamed, what that kind of comes to my mind is when I'm teaching recorder, because recorder, there's a lot going on there. I mean, there's fine motor skills, there's air control, there's reading, there's the musical skills of it, listening, hearing, like that. So, one thing that I love to do with recorder, or for those students that struggle a little bit, especially those that are in sort of an inclusion program, is color coding things, making it as easy as can. For recorder, for instance, most of the time you can tape the back hole.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need that hole, and that helps. That right there helps them make so many more notes. There's also some great recorders out there, like the Nuva recorders, that are more of like pressing like a key than covering the holes. But getting away from the recorder instance a little bit is, I like to break up into groups for different things, whether or not it's full on center breakout, or maybe it's just we're working on notations and popsicle sticks or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be strategic in the way that I group these kids, so that one, I'm able to shuffle around and help them, but also that there was some peers that are able to help them. And also be very, very careful to make sure that the peers that I'm helping are helping them and not just giving them the answer, because I don't want them to be able to regurgitate the answer or be able to, I want them to think it. I want to be able to move through the process with us, rather than them just kind of being there and it's happening around them.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I've always said too, the music room should be a full inclusion experience. Just what I mean by that is, I've noticed in the regular classroom, which I get it, because you have different learning styles, and different learning levels. What am I trying to say? You know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So like what I mean is they break the kids off into reading groups by their reading level. But in the music room, it doesn't have to be that way. And I love that you said that. Like when you're grouping kids, you strategically group them. You're not just going to say, okay, all my low learners are going to be in this group together and all my high learners over here, because I think in the music room, what's awesome, there's so many things awesome about the music room, but one of the awesome things about grouping kids or even putting them with a partner is you can put them together with kids who are going to help them and who will encourage them. And even just sitting next to a kid who sings, as a good singer, or sitting next to a kid who's great at reading rhythms will sometimes encourage these kids and be, just to, follow along with them. I think about I'm going to bring up my son again, because he is in a self-inclusion classroom this year. And so what that means is he's in an all-day classroom with other autistic kids. There's about 15 of them, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, but they join another class for music. Him and another little girl in his class. So they join the 4th graders. And I love that because I feel like for multiple reasons, but one reason I love it is because these kids are learning that there's kids that are coming in here that aren't in our classroom all day, but also there's kids coming in here and he is making friends. And for the most part, I've heard nothing but great things about them just including him. And, just, I don't know. I just think it's a great thing when schools have a program like that where these kids sometimes aren't around students maybe that are special learners, like they're mainstream, but they haven't been around these kids like you've worked with as well in an autism classroom. And so I don't know, I would love to touch on that from your standpoint. When you have these kids come in, maybe have you had an experience like that where they've had the mainstream class and have another class join them, or a few students from that class join them?
Yeah, so that was mainly how my student teaching experience worked. And then what I kind of morphed into, not student teaching there anymore, but working in those classrooms as an aide. I would go with them to the art related arts. For one, I got to give special education some credit here. I mean, even for when I was in school, special education is completely different, and it's more visible. It's not, we're not just shoving them in a corner and letting them do their thing. We're part of it. And I think just watching the students react and interact with these students just as people makes my heart so full.
Yes.
Because that's what it comes down to. All these students are just little people that are going to grow up and become big people. I love that we're working on that community, especially with music being so community based. I love working with that in whatever way that may be. One of my favorite examples is during my student teaching, we were doing some drum circles with fifth grade. We had one student that came from one of the special education classrooms, and she was just kind of there, and she always internalized the music. Like their teachers would always come up to me and tell me that she would always be singing the songs that we were doing later in the day. But we were doing some drum circles where we all had to play together, and she would just clap. So we're like, get her a drum, get her a drum, get her a drum. And it was amazing because she was, she still had her iPad, she still had her headphones, but she was completely involved in the lesson. And not only that, but the kids were encouraging her and were glad that she was there. They backed up the circle so that she could be a part of the actual physical circle. It just it makes my heart so full when we're able to see that community aspect of music, which is really what draws me to teaching music, is because of that community aspect.
Oh yeah, I love that example. They don't call it Asperger's anymore because it's changed everything. What is it? What am I trying to say? DSM. Is that the word? Thank you. Yeah, gosh, DSM, my brain is like, it's changed a little bit, so they don't classify it. But anyways, when I did my student teaching, there was a little girl with Asperger's, and she was pulled in too as well.
Yeah.
And I just remember the littlest things would set her off. And I remember, being my first like classroom experience out of college, I was like, oh my gosh. And that was just right at the portion where I had taken over teaching.
Yeah.
And the teacher was just sitting there not helping me because I'm supposed to like learn how to do this. And I'm like, hello, anything. But yeah, I was so, like you said, I was just so amazed at these kids. Most of them kept a straight face and I'd watch a couple of the kids just put their arms around her or offer up support, or are you okay? And I just thought it was amazing to see the compassion. And I think it's so true how much the kids, I mean, they can teach adults a lot of things, right? Just the compassion they have for each other and just the acceptance and just how much they just, I feel like for the most part, when kids act like they're not accepting, it's just because they don't understand. Yes. Because maybe it's something new. Maybe they've never experienced a child that learns that way. And so, like you said, in the music room, any classroom for that matter, but it's our job as teachers to educate these kids and, not embarrass that child, but hey, this child is, they're upset. Maybe the noise bothers them. So can somebody get their headphones? Or, I got comments before too of, well, that's not fair. Why don't they have to come sit in this circle? Or why do they get to, over and over? So how do you deal with that when you have the kids who maybe don't understand, or they're playing the it's not fair game with you and that child doesn't get the egg shaker and everybody else has to? How do you handle that?
Well, first, I think the earlier you start introducing this kind of acceptance, the easier it's going to be, because kindergartners, they want to love, like, and
I know.
And it just keeps going. And I think that even goes to adulthood. If they're training these students to be inclusive and understanding, hopefully that'll travel into adulthood.
Yeah.
But I mean, just keep it simple, keep it relationship based. Like, oh, Johnny, sometimes he needs to walk around a little bit. Sometimes he needs to take a break. And, that's fine. And, like sometimes I need to take a break. Sometimes I need to do this. We're all different people. Some of us, we all have different needs. And that's one thing that I love seeing in, the educational trends now is all students realize, or, teachers realize that all students have different needs, whether it be flexible seating or fidgets or just things like that really make me hopeful for the future that we're going to be more accepting and more inclusive. And in the music room, I think it is just, again, keep it relationship based and just don't make a big deal out of it. But, if he needs to make it known, just do it in a way of respect. And again, realizing that this is a little person that we're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's awesome advice. Okay. So in your opinion, which I probably already know the answer to this, but do you feel like autism students should be mainstreamed in the music room or stay together with their self-contained class?
This is such a huge question. Again, with the autism spectrum, it's just that, it's a spectrum.
Yes.
So I think a lot of it depends on the individual student. But I would say if they're able to come into a mainstream classroom and enjoy music with their like-age peers, then do it. I think that social interaction is super important with a student your age. Just like you're saying about your son, making friends that are outside of his kind of circle. I think that's super important, not only for your son and students like him, but for the general population to realize that there's these people that exist and that's okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we really, as music educators, need to be critical and ask, well, is this really the least restrictive musical environment? And I know that's a slippery slope, and I know there's a lot of scheduling things and all this and that get into that. But if we're really thinking about the student and if they're coming to our core class that music is, what is the goal? If they're coming in fourth grade and they're just kind of there experiencing music, that's awesome. Like, I'm glad that they're experiencing music, but if they're not making the music, if they're not learning through the music, I think that it can be helpful to have a smaller class, for one thing, but also to have a class that's more specialized. What I love about my schedule is that I get a little bit of both. Even though I'm a traveling teacher, I teach 2 40-minute sections every 3 days of self-contained classrooms. And I love that. I love it. And it makes my heart so full. But again, these are students who are able to be successful in the setting they're in now. Ideally, I would love for they tend to be a little bit younger currently. I'd love for them to start joining their peers as they get older. But where I'm coming from as a music educator is if they're able to be musically successful with their peers, I'd love to have them with their peers. But I think that we can sometimes do a disservice to our students if we're just putting them in social mainstreaming for the sake of saying they're with their like age peers.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that completely. It's based on the kid's needs. It goes back to like if a child needs headphones, sometimes that's perfectly fine in the music room. But sometimes if the child is constantly needing headphones and they're sitting in the corner not participating because it's all just too loud, there's only so much accommodating you can do when you're trying to reach the other learners in your room as well. So definitely. I love that your school does that. That's amazing. I really wish, gosh, it just makes me wish most schools did that. Or have programs like that,
It's definitely something that I love about my current position. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I know you have some favorite resources when it comes to planning lessons for a self-contained class. We talked about the overwhelm that teachers feel sometimes when they're just maybe not sure how to teach an autistic child or any special learner for that matter. So anyways, any lessons or advice that have worked well for you, I'd love for you to share.
First, for working with students specifically with autism, I came across this resource when I was doing some research for grad school on students with autism in the music classroom, and it's a research-based book, so it's a little clunky, but there's actually a lot of really useful stuff. I mean, there's song examples and templates for like learning goals, which I love. It's called Music Education for Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder. It's by Sheila Scott. Sheila Scott.
There you go.
And there we go. But it's an amazing book. It talks about, I think, ages like 3 through 9. But I think a lot of it can be adapted to older students. Again, it's very research based, but not like super research based where it's hard to read at all. I thought it was very readable. A lot of really hands-on things that you could try tomorrow if you wanted to. Another one is Music for Little People, the Fire Robin. I looked upon this one. My music library when I was an undergrad got closed, so they were moving some stuff out, and they withdrew this book, and I took it. And I had it on my shelf for like 4 years before I even realized that it was. But there's a lot of really good stuff in there, finger plays and things like that, that I use. Again, I have younger students right now, so if you have a little older students, you might need to find a little bit. This might not be the best resource for you, but if you have younger students, I think this is a really good one. Another one is any of the We Sing. My favorite one is We Sing Dinosaurs. But there's so many We Sing books. Again, it's like finger plays. It's all thematic. I know a lot of my students love dinosaurs. Again, they're a little bit older. Most of them are boys, so that helps too with the dinosaurs.
Oh yeah.
But I love all the We Sing books. There's a lot of them. My last big resource, it's called Coast Music Therapy, and I'll give you the link that you can put in the show notes. But there's just a lot of really kind of user-friendly things to kind of bridge the gap a little bit with music therapy. So there's, a lot of this is for like parents and music therapists, but there's a lot that we could use to kind of work a little bit of mix of something a music therapist might do. Obviously, we're not a music therapist. We can't do that.
Right.
They are the professionals. But I think that having that same kind of not just focusing on musical goals all the time can apply here. So there's a lot of good resources there on that side as well.
Yeah. Music therapy intrigues me
so much. Just so much.
I mean, I have read so many articles and I try to get ideas because I mean, I really do feel like there's a lot that we can use. Obviously, we're not music therapists, but in the music room.
Oh, yeah.
We'd love to bring music therapists in to help music teachers at some point.
I love that. That would be amazing.
Well, Bryson, I've enjoyed this conversation. Before we go, is there any other advice you want to give to teachers listening to this who are maybe teaching either their first year teaching or their first year of teaching students with special needs? Any advice you have?
My first thing is treat them like people, and everything else is going to happen. It's, love them like your own, and whatever you do, as long as you're doing their best interest, it's going to be better than if you didn't try anything. Don't let being afraid of making a mistake get in the way of doing something. Just give it a try. Try your best and try to better serve them. One thing that I did want to share, I created a little freebie, a little PDF of 5 ways to better serve students with exceptional needs. I'll give you the link and you can put that in the show notes.
Yes.
But I just think it all kind of boils down to 5 ways that you can try to do something better. And I think if you're trying, you're on the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. Let everybody know where they can find you so they can connect with you. And if they have any more questions about this, I know that you would love for them to reach out as well.
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram and Facebook at That Music Teacher, as well as thatmusicteacher.com, or you can send me an email at thatmusicteacherblog@gmail.com.
And I love that handle, by the way. That's amazing.
It's my favorite. Thank you so much.
So inventive. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This conversation definitely, like I said, has been needed, and I love it so very much. And I appreciate you just coming on and talking to our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.